Jose, can you see by the dawn's really light? You got me. I'm gonna turn off. Sorry. I'm also gonna leave these like on a seat up here. Okay, these are extras for next Saturdays. Because they were, I saw them sitting on my desk, and I thought, oh well, that's next Saturday. All right, we good to go? All right, welcome everybody. 12 o'clock on the button. Thank you for coming to this week's Discovering History with Andrew Richmond and Hollie Davis. I'm going to let them tell you all about themselves, but just want to welcome you all here again today and welcome everybody who's on the YouTube channel with us. We got some folks up there, Katie? Not yet. There will be. Don't worry. A lot of folks can also tune in later. So if you'd like to tune into that later, all of those are up there. As always, this cannot be happen. These events couldn't happen without the support of the Washington County Public Library. They support all of this programming for us, all of our speaker series. Please support the library and the work that they do in our community. We partner with them on a lot of different projects, and this one is really important for our programming. I wanted to let you know of a few other events that are coming up. I said this last week. I know some of you, I just saw you last week, so hang in there with me. First of all, you may not know, but on Sunday it's March. Yeah. Okay. So if that's a revelation to you, I'm sorry about that. Tomorrow here in this room, we're having a volunteer recruitment fair starting at 11. We're looking for folks to help us with the upcoming school groups or to be Putnam House volunteers or work at the front desk or anything of that nature. So if you've got someone who you think might be interested, send them to us tomorrow at 11. You don't need to RSVP, you can just show up. Because March starts Sunday, that would mean next Friday is the first Friday of March. We are not having a speaker that day because we are hosting Ashland University's Teaching American History series. So this room will be filled with about, I think right now it's like 18 educators learning, teaching the American Revolution. So we're so excited to be able to host that and kind of get in with that program. On March 12th, we're going to have a museum after hours. We're going to try to start doing some after hours events. So we'll have some different speakers in different places. It's a come and go as you wish. We're going to do candle making. Is that right, Katie? And weaving. So we'll have some activities. If you're a member, it's free. If you're not a member, it's $2.50. We're going to start trying to do some after hours events, kind of commemorating the $2.50, and we figure everybody can remember the price of $2.50. So that's part of that. So the next Discovering History speaker will be on Friday, March 13th, and it will be Jan Adams here. She's talking about myths and monuments, allegorical figures influencing the nation. We've had some really great conversations, and we're excited to hear that talk as well. And then the next one after that is the following Wednesday. It's Wednesday, March 18th. So the ones in March are Friday the 13th and then Wednesday the 18th. And that's Stephanie Bonac she's the education director for the First Ladies Museum and Library in Canton. And she's giving her talk on Gilded Age Gals. It's about First Ladies during the Gilded Age. She always has such great information, and she's wonderful. We really enjoy working with her. I did though, and then once we get to April, we're back to the first Friday. I also wanted to give a little information on next Saturday. So First Congregational Church in Marietta, this is their 230th birthday. In December, I believe, is when it's their 230. Maybe I'm wrong. I might be making that up. But this is their 230th year. Next Saturday, they're having a presentation by Ann Besh from the Surveyors Historical Society. Ann was here. She brought the Surveyors Historical Society to Marietta in September. They had their big national conference here. And so Ann is going to be the speaker. I'll leave these flyers here, but it's next Saturday, March 7th from 2 to 3 down at First Congregational Church, and it's a free event as well. Anything else missing that I need to let folks know about? Yeah, I don't think so. Yes. Noon. She also is the speaker that evening at the Castle's food history event. Yes. So she's doing 2 different presentations. I know what it is, but I don't know. Go to the Castle's website and find out about the event that evening. I think there's tickets still available, but she's a speaker for that evening food history event. And then her talk that she's giving here at noon is a different topic altogether. We try to partner with the Castle on that when we can. It'll be a different topic. Yeah. Yes. We did that a couple of times last year with some of the Lafayette speakers. They were kids. They came from out of town. So we got to have 2 different, events with the same person. So we try to do those as much as we can. Yeah. Okay. Nothing else. Yes, sir. Yes. Yeah. Ann Besh is talking about Rufus Putnam as a surveyor. Yeah. At the First Congregational Church. Okay. So without further ado, I'm going to let them tell you a little bit more, but I was very lucky to be able to, I'll go this way, to attend the opening of Heartland up at Decorative Arts Center of Ohio in Lancaster. If you don't know, that is a free museum. And they do some really incredible work, and these guys do incredible work with them. I went with my sister who lives in Zanesville area and her 12-year-old son, and it was for all of us. There's some really great things. You're going to learn a lot from what they have to tell you. And I guess on that, I have to do this. I'll trade off my microphone. Well, we have to for our YouTubers.
I'm going to be a problem.
All right, so without further ado,
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aaron, for inviting us here again. A lot of you are familiar faces. I'm sure I'm a familiar face. I've been in this room a lot. In fact, we were just talking beforehand. My first visit to Campus Martius would have been in the summer of 2002 when I was in graduate school. I was doing my master's research on early the early local furniture. 2004 was the first time I was at this podium speaking about my research. That's when I met you, Barb, and probably some of you else, some of the others. And we have been all over the place in the intervening years in the auction business, appraisal business, antique business, and various sorts. But we had always remembered our time fondly in Marietta. And so when we were both self-employed in 2016, we thought, we're going to move somewhere interesting. So we came back here and we moved here in 2017 and are happy we did. And we now run Meander Auctions, which is just up the road in Whipple. It's the big church in the middle, former Holy Smoke Event Center. Can't miss it if you drive through Whipple.
Through Whipple. I love it. You make it sound like it's an experience.
The sprawling metropolis.
We're
so-
in downtown Whipple. That's what I like to tell people.
We are downtown Whipple. So we're happy to spend some time. We thank you for spending some time on this glorious Ohio February day to let us blather on about cool old stuff.
I'm always a problem. I should just tell you that at the beginning. Usually Andrew tries to give me a script and get me to follow it. Usually undermine it. So Heartland, the stories of Ohio through 250 objects. It's kind of the idea, some of you may be familiar, the British Museum, 25 years ago probably now, the British Museum did the history of the world in 100 objects from their collection. And it's kind of, there have been tons of variations on that, but we thought, well, with America's 250th, what if we tell interesting stories of Ohio in 250 objects? And as we got started, we quickly realized that, it's not possible to go chronologically. Things are all over the place. So the galleries are divided by themes, and I hope you'll have time to go up and see the show, but we're really going to kind of tour through in that way today. We have resources and then people, and then there's a smaller space that's conflict. Then we have tradition, and then change. I warned everybody.
Anybody here who's been to the Decorative Arts Center? Okay, so next time we talk about an exhibition there, everybody will raise their hand because you'll all go in. The show runs through April 26th, so there's plenty of time. You can wait until the flowers are starting to come out.
It's a great museum. It is a historic home in downtown that was converted for this purpose. They do such cool work. They have, it's a Georgian.
It's a Greek Revival House. It's its 25th year as a museum. It was donated to the county by the descendants of one of the early owners in 2000. So it's been around for just
They have a little attached building where they teach art classes for children and adults. They run camps, but they have a rotating gallery space upstairs. And they have, as Aaron mentioned, it is free. It's a fun day trip. Lancaster is not that far. You don't have to go on the interstate, even if you don't want to. They're right like a block and a half down. There's a really lovely little local cafe. It's a treat to go up and see an exhibit for free and then have lunch.
There has been and will be continued to be a bunch of programming related to the exhibition. We did this same talk back then when it opened a couple of weeks ago. There'll be 2 more talks in relation to this exhibition. One is Collectors on Collecting. We invited 3 of the couples who were lenders to this exhibition. So this exhibition, 250 objects, there are about 32 or 33 institutional and private lenders to that exhibition, stuff from all over the state and even farther beyond. I went to Williamsburg to pick up one object. But 3 of those couples are going to come talk just about collecting and why they collect and what they collect and what collecting looks like in 2026. And another program will be a book talk by a noted Ohio author, David Giffels. He's written a number of books. One of our favorites is called The Hard Way on Purpose. It's about him and his wife
kind of our personal motto.
Raising a family in an old home and all the
value of doing things the non-traditional way on purpose.
But in 2020, he got a grant and went around and he called the book Barnstorming Ohio. Went around and talked to a lot of folks on the eve of running up to the 2020 election to get a sense of where Ohio is and how they're thinking politically, culturally, economically, etc. So he'll be talking. I don't have those dates off the top of my head, but they're on the website, which you can find out there. And like I said, it's a free museum. The programs sometimes have a small fee, but well worth it.
And we should say before we start to take you through, on the one hand, 250 objects sounds like a lot, and on the other, it is just a paltry sum when you start to list famous and Ohioans, famous historic events. And the thing that I said to Andrew when we started this, is that if it happened in America in some fashion, it happened in Ohio. Ohio, we are the heartland for a reason. And that's really what we tried to capture. So as we go through this, there will be things that you've never heard of, and there'll be some things that are familiar. It's interesting as we give this talk in different places, people are familiar with their own different bits of local history and their parts that
And there'll be
resonate.
some famous stories or famous folks or famous events that aren't in here because we can't fit it all. So we thought we'd try and highlight some things that maybe you hadn't heard of.
Literally 2 days before the exhibit opened, Andrew was taking my pen away from me and saying that we're turning the lights off. We're done. You can't keep adding people. Like, we're finished.
So the first gallery resources, and all these gallery themes we define as broadly as possible. So in resources, particularly, obviously, there are natural resources, but also human resources. So what we're going to do, rather than try and bounce around and show you a whole bunch of stuff in the exhibition, we're really going to focus on one object, or in this case, group of objects in each gallery, and kind of tell that story and why it fits in that gallery and how it contributes to our overall theme. So for resources, decided glass was a great place to start. As many of you likely know, Ohio has a long, long history of glass making. It was one of the first and most important industries. As soon as the folks started building cabins here along the banks of the Ohio and Muskingum River 200 plus years ago, they were making glass. In this case, all of the glass there is made in Ohio, with the exception of Little Pink Cruet, which is Heisey. The rest were either made in Zanesville or one is made in Moscow, which is on the western part of the state. So, why was glass made here? Well, you need three things to make glass. First, you need the raw material, silica. And then to fire the furnace, you need fuel. And then importantly, you need a way to get your products to market. Because any craftsperson in the early era was not just going to depend on the local economy. They were looking to find ways to expand their marketplace well beyond their local communities. So in terms of raw materials, we'll take you back about 10, 15,000 years to the last ice age, when the glaciers were scraping down from the north, pushing all kinds of material. And they came down from the northwest part of Ohio and pushed things. And you see the plateaus. What the plateaus are, all that stuff that they were scraping and pushing ahead of them. Then the glaciers receded, and the hills were formed. And a lot of the material they were pushing ahead of them was silica.
It's very like your driveway. Very recently, it's the same thing on a smaller scale. That's what was happening.
Resources, wood for the furnaces. I should point out, anytime you see
The pointer up in the corner, the numbered, the objects in the exhibition are numbered, and that little Ohio.
If it's an actual object in the exhibition, we have that logo there, so you know that it's there. Resources. When Ohio's first came west, when Americans first came west, well, when European settlers first came west, Ohio, what we now think of Ohio, is 95% forested. So, and I know growing up in Ohio and Ohio history, we were told that a squirrel could climb a tree on the Ohio River and get all the way to Lake Erie without ever touching the ground. That was probably pretty true. They saw the trees, and therefore the wood was to them was virtually endless. And this is a painting by Sala Bosworth, a view of Marietta down about 1835, 1840, when you can see the hills are just blanketed with trees. So in terms of glass making, you had plenty of fuel for the furnaces. Finally, in order to get things to market, you needed, in this case, water. And Ohio is abundant in waterways, not only the lake and the river, the big river, but all the inland waterways that allowed even small flatboats to get quite far inland. And so glassmakers in Zanesville could send their stuff all the way down the Ohio and Mississippi. And I cannot overstate the importance of the Ohio River, not just in glass making, but in frankly, the history of this country. It was the first interstate highway system in early America in the late 18th and early 19th century. It's almost hard to imagine how many people and how much stuff headed south and west on the Ohio from western Pennsylvania all the way down south through the Mississippi Valley as well. Boats were needed early on, flatboats, the simple flatboats that could navigate the waters, unpowered. They were just largely going with the flow, quite literally. The big challenge there, of course, before the Corps of Engineers started maintaining shipping channels in July, if it was a dry summer, you could walk across the river. It was not deep enough for even some of these flatboats. Later on, of course, we got steam power, so now goods and people could go both up and down the river, which is quite helpful, especially for trade and things like glass. And so what you had in places like Kent, Mantua, Zanesville, Moscow, and a handful of other towns throughout Ohio, they were making what essentially were utilitarian objects, right? I mean, they were drinking vessels, storage vessels, pouring vessels. But if you've ever seen glass blowers work, I mean, they're artists, and they were creating little works of art that you set your table with, and really exceptional examples. And in such an enormous array of colors and forms, from bowls to flasks to bottles to sugar bowls, just I mean, it's astonishing how the variety that they created, and the quantity is staggering. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the commodity sections in the newspaper where they list pork prices and corn prices. In the 1830s in Cincinnati, along with pork, corn, wheat, etc., they listed Zanesville bottles as a commodity. So that gives you a sense of how many of those were coming down the river every day, every week, every year. You can see there's a bit about production. So you can see.
So the upper one is
Yeah.
from the correspondence with the Zanesville
Yeah.
Courier, and they were talking about how much they were sending out.
Yeah. So Zanesville glass, 14,140 pounds of Zanesville glass. This Zanesville, Ohio glass was being used in windows in London. So again,
the economics of it that would allow it to be practical for in that era for you to box up window glass and ship it across the Atlantic. It's just really staggering.
So that was the early part. And then in the middle of the 19th century, 1850s, what happens? Oil, gas were
you got
were
that
discovered.
suddenly you got that nice even heat that was a lot more
So
controlled.
the map is a petro map of the Ohio. So where the red and orange is, that's where we had good petrochemicals under the ground. And so Ohio glass production exploded, pun intended, even further. You had more places like Heisey and Cambridge and Tiffin and other places throughout the state were producing even more glass.
Which is a good thing, actually, that they came on the natural gas. Andrew mentioned it was one of the fascinating things that I learned when I was researching this. One of the reasons that we talked in part about natural resources was because of also the damage that we did to them. It's a good thing that they discovered gas when they did, because as Andrew says, in about 1790, 95% forested. By about 1890, 1900, we were down to 10%. Today we're 30. So if that gives you a sense, if you remove essentially 2 out of every 3 trees you see, that's how deforested Ohio was. And in fact, I'd heard this anecdotally, but I confirmed it with the research. From 1910 to about 1924, 1925, white-tailed deer and bobcats were completely extirpated in the state of Ohio. They, for all intents and purposes, did not exist in Ohio. And in the 1920s, Shawnee State Forest reintroduced them. So that natural gas development came along at a good time, because they were that wood that had seemed so endless, it was less really than 100 years to make that kind of an impact on it.
But with natural gas, as I said, the number of glass companies ballooned, and the quantity, quality, variety, color all expanded as well. You have Heisey, you have Tiffin Glass, you have Libby Glass up in Toledo, which is still one of the leading glass producers in the world, or at least for that kind of glass. I mean, it really is a remarkable story of one of Ohio's most important industries.
Libby was making windshields for Ford early on, because they could put them on the lake and send them right around to Detroit.
And just for fun, you've probably heard of uranium glass. Some of this later 19th and early 20th century glass, they added a little bit of uranium to help with the color. And so when you put it under a black light, it glows.
It's become really popular. Like kids like it now, actually.
Yeah, the influencers love uranium glass. So that's why we picked the bottles to talk about this first, Carly, because glass really is as far as Ohio's industry, is a great mirror of Ohio's history and economy and culture. Glass has been important from the very beginning. It still is very important. There still is a lot of glass being produced. Not quite the decorative stuff as much, but a lot of glass being produced here. And it's only here because of the resources, not only the natural resources, but the humans who came west and were able to make it.
So with that, we transition to the next gallery space of people. Ohio has had so many fascinating people, really just astounding artists and presidents and inventors. There's so much that was done here. In all of that glory of objects that we hope you'll go see in person. You see the bed there. That's a pretty simple, straightforward, it's a plain, neatly made bed. The thing that makes it special is at the base of one of the posts, it's marked. And the mark on that one says H. Boyd, since CIN, Ohio. Henry Boyd was actually born into slavery in Kentucky in 1808, I believe. And he was actually afforded a pretty unique opportunity. He got to earn his freedom. And he actually went into southern West Virginia and worked some at the salt mines. And that was part of the way that he would go and earned money. He earned his freedom and moved to Cincinnati. And when he first came to Cincinnati, he couldn't find work. As an African American man, the shops, a lot of the workers would refuse to work with him. So he started doing odd jobs and very quickly developed his own reputation and started making his own beds. And the genius of that, okay, so he actually ran an integrated shop. He had 20 to 50 men working for him at various points, and
he's producing 1,000 bedsteads a year. Again, river. A lot of them were going down the river to points south, St. Louis, New Orleans.
Some of them were probably even going onto the riverboats for the people. So, but what made Boyd's
It's actually kind of a delicious irony there, isn't it? Right? Here's this man born into slavery, was able to earn by his freedom, and undoubtedly some of the beds he was making were then being used to furnish antebellum plantations.
So he was, but he was hugely prolific and the riverfront. He actually had a shop. His shop is actually at the corner of I think the map you can see. This is if you've not seen it, this is a wonderful thing to find online.
See it in person.
Well, yes, you could see it in person. If you go to Cincinnati, it's at the
Public Library in Cincinnati. This is a detail of, I think it's a 7 photograph panorama taken by Porter and Fontaine, 1848. They're daguerreotype photos, and so they're extremely clear.
That is one thing about niceness looking online, because you can really zoom in on the details. They set up a camera across the river from Cincinnati and chunk sections of it and put it all together.
It's so clear they could read the name boards on the boats, so they could actually then pinpoint the date based on the travel records. And then I don't think it's in this one, it's in one of the other views. There's a clock tower, and they could read the time of day.
So they knew exactly when and where it was taken.
So it's on view at the Public Library in Cincinnati.
But his shop was right downtown.
Right there.
It is actually where some of the municipal annex buildings are. So he was right downtown in the heart of all of that, taking things right down the street to the river and sending them out. And we have...
So about that same time, 1830s, 1840s. But in 1830, Cincinnati was it was producing more furniture than any other city west of the East Coast. So aside from Boston, Philadelphia, etc. And half of the furniture they were producing was going down the river. So it was a huge population of cabinet shops, and the journeymen. This is something they were following on the tails of journeymen in Philadelphia, New York, and originally in London, essentially unionized. So what they did was they put together a price book, and this was a price book that outlined the standard prices that they would charge for their labor to make a 4-door chest, a bed, and they actually had it all priced out. And if you wanted special additional additions to whatever form of furniture you were asking, it was all priced out. So the master then of the shop could calculate the labor it would take for his journeyman, and we could also then calculate the day. So this was such an amazing hub of furniture production in early America, with Cincinnati, about this time where Boyd was there.
It's one of the few benchmarks that you have also once you leave the East for what was happening there. There was not a great deal.
And this is during the classical era, so full-blown classical furniture was being made. A lot of mahogany veneer, a lot of turnings. They had specialty turners and carvers working the city. So one shop may job out the turning to one guy, the carving to another, bring all the parts in, have his journeyman put it together, and then put it on a flat or put it on a riverboat and send it down. Again, you go to pre-Civil War plantation homes in the Gulf South, you're going to find a lot of Cincinnati-made furniture. There was so much coming from Cincinnati in 1855. The firm of Mitchell and Ramblesburg established a showroom in St. Louis. In 1860, they established a showroom in New Orleans. And so, again, huge quantity of furniture heading south.
So what makes Boyd's bed so interesting, and the reason that it's marked, it's one of those things that you think of, and when somebody tells you, like, well, that's obvious now, but it was brilliant. If you've ever put a bed together, it's one of those marriage trying situations where somebody's trying to hold the footboard up and somebody's trying to get the rails in. He threaded the rails in opposite directions. So when you tightened them in one direction, it was tightening at the other end and pulling in snug. It was a brilliant idea, really basic. But because he was African American, he could not patent the idea. A man named George Porter did patent the idea. There's been some speculation that he might have been a friend of Boyd and done it in partnership with him. We don't really have a lot of data to back that up, but Boyd's beds are so famous. One of the others that I know of was at the Smithsonian Museum, the African American History Museum.
Nobody paid attention to patents at that point anyway.
Right.
So you'll find that innovation on beds made, particularly throughout Ohio.
But he got
Kentucky.
disgusted and started marking his beds. And it's just really, he continued to work in Cincinnati. Fascinating character. His shop was burned. That was a really tense period, the period when he was working in Cincinnati, the 1830s to the outbreak of the Civil War, particularly. The Fugitive Slave Act was making it difficult for people of color to be safe on the streets. And his shop was actually burned 3 times. He finally had to retreat and just basically work out of the back of his own property because he couldn't get insurance any longer. So after the 3rd burning, but he lived in Cincinnati and created a huge and bustling business, and as many people believe was probably because of his craftsmanship. He was one of the first people on the Underground Railroad when you came north of the river in Cincinnati, because his craftsmanship allowed him to create really well devised hiding places for people. He helped everybody that he could who was coming through.
One of those great unsung heroes that you may not have ever heard of, but his story is really worth telling. And so we're going to go from a really cool bed with a really cool story to what I think is probably one of the most unusual things we've selected for this exhibition.
Andrew said, I'm going to buy a waffle iron on eBay. Like an avocado green waffle iron.
So why would we include an avocado green 1970s waffle iron in this exhibition on Ohio?
You all probably know the answer to this. The people in Lancaster were stumped. Some of you may know the
well,
answer.
You can't probably read the sticker, but the sticker has that magic word, Teflon. So again, we can probably breeze through this story a little bit more quickly for you folks, as you all know. So Teflon was, of course, made by the DuPont company. The first DuPont, the origins of the DuPont family in America were 1790s. They were fleeing the French Revolution, and they landed in northern Delaware. The Eleuthère Irénée DuPont.
Isn't that a great name? It's just fun to say.
And they started making black powder, gunpowder. Eventually, they got into other explosives and ultimately ended up in chemicals. So if you ever find yourself in northern Delaware, the DuPont family homes, and there are a bunch of them, are worth a visit. My graduate work was actually at the Winterthur Museum, which was Henry Francis DuPont.
We should put a trip together. We should all go, because it's a wonderful, again, 3 days. You can see the gardens, the houses.
The gardens at Longwood, and DuPont was a collector, and he turned his 8-room house that he inherited into 180 rooms filled with gold stuff.
It's wonderful.
Then DuPont looked west, and they like being on the river because they need water for their manufacturing, but water also is a great way to get the materials to and from. This is the Washington Works, as you all know. At the time it was built, the largest chemical plant on the planet. But we also know that one of the things that the water allowed them to do for a long, long time was get rid of their off byproducts, and particularly C8.
Just to throw out the one statistic, between 1951 and 2003, roughly 50-year period, they estimate that 1.8 million gallons of C8 went straight into the river. And if 5 million people derive, that's not talking about those of us who have wells and got surface contamination, but 5 million people derive their drinking water from the Ohio River pretty
Again,
directly.
we can't think of the river as just a local thing because it's only a couple hundred miles downriver to major city of Cincinnati and everybody along the way. So it was a long-reaching problem that you can read the book, watch the stories, fictionalized, or but you all probably again know this pretty well. You probably know folks who
take your blood pressure medication first. I don't watch them because I get angry.
But
Andrew watches them and tells me about them.
But this is one of those stories that people in this area are very familiar with. But once you get very far away from the river, nobody's heard about it. And it was important, especially since I could find kind of a decorative arts objects, the waffle iron, to bring this story into this exhibition. I thought it was well worth it.
It's a slightly different take on more of Ohio's history, but we've also had a role in cleaning up. 1969, the Cuyahoga River caught fire. Clevelanders, by the way, were really annoyed because a photo of this ended up in Time. And from Cleveland's perspective, first of all, this had happened before. We don't know why you're making such a fuss about it now. But they had actually, at that point, through deindustrialization and intentional efforts, the river was actually getting cleaner. But it was in 1969 when a photo made its way into Time magazine from an earlier incident that it really blew up, so to speak. This was a wonderful inclusion. The man's name was Fred Davis. He went by Dave. He was actually born in Kansas City, raised in the Kansas City blues tradition, and he was a Black man who moved around the Midwest working industrial jobs, and he ended up in Cleveland. And he died tragically young, but he did one tape in somebody's living room in the 60s. And it was lost for years, and someone found it and thought, Dave Davis deserves to be a legend.
This was only about 2 or 3 years ago that this tape surfaced, and somebody said, we need to turn this into an album. So they did. They remastered it and turned it into this album, and it was released in 2 versions, the plain black vinyl and this variegated, which, because it was Cleveland, as Cuyahoga River Smoke Edition.
Yeah, the Cuyahoga River Fire Smoke.
So one object that we get to talk about, the Cuyahoga River Fire, and also a great story of Cleveland blues in the 1960s.
It is available. If
you can find it on YouTube. It's on.
Interested in blues, there's a young blues guy named Eli Paperboy Reed, and his dad was a blues musician, and his dad worked with Dave Davis. They played blues together, and he's the one who recorded it. And Eli discovered it years later, and he was like, as a kid who had heard it, he thought this guy was great, and everybody, I realized I got to hear him, and nobody else did, and so he has enough success in his own career now that he was able to leverage that into getting Dave's album released.
So this is a watercolor view of one of the ore docks in Cleveland. With all the industrial, when Ohio industrialized, it's not surprising to have some of these environmental challenges because, both on the river and on the lake, huge industrial production. And this is a good example of that.
But there was a lot of positive outcome from the river fire. That was 1969. The inaugural Earth Day was the following year. It was within the next 2 years.
The Environmental Protection Act was 1970. The Clean Water Act was in 73. So, sometimes it takes a tragedy to make good things happen, and fortunately the good things did happen. But not all of Ohio's environmental issues are industrial in scale.
This is one of my. I'm not an Ohioan, so I enjoy this story. So I don't know. This is one of those that's locally. It's very well known. This part of the state may not be known as well. In 1986, they had with the United Way in Cleveland. The United Way has this great idea for a fundraiser. They were going to get in the Guinness Book of World Records, and they were going to have this massive balloon launch. So they got high school kids to come and volunteer and fill the balloons and warehouses, and their goal was like 2 million balloons. They didn't quite get.
I mean, I know we're already kind of cringing at releasing that many balloons, but
they got north of 1.5 million balloons, and they gave out T-shirts like this that were given to a young 16-year-old in high school who volunteered to fill balloons and be handlers for the big nets, and they were set to release. And there was bad weather coming in off of the lake. And so they moved the launch up to release them. But as the weather rushed on shore with the cold air, normally helium balloons float way up out of sight and they eventually very slowly dissipate and find their way back down. It got just a short amount of height off of the ground before the cold air hit it and shoved 1.5 million balloons back into Cleveland traffic. There were accidents. It created a disaster in the city. They clogged the waterways. It was terrible. I mean, they thwarted search and rescue efforts on the lake. And so
The Guinness Book has almost immediately declared that they would no longer be including balloon launches in future
Cleveland's
volumes.
record stands by default. So, but 86, right? That's kind of, and they sponsored, it was a sponsorship of the balloons.
I think that was one of the, because that was also when Earth Day was starting to really get some traction. I think that was one of those events where people started to rethink balloon launches in general.
Quantity like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they sponsored it. So it was like, we'll sponsor, you get 20 cents for every 2 balloons filled or something like that. And so people were sponsoring balloons.
So this is a panoramic photograph, sometimes called a yard-long photograph. It's just upriver a ways. It's Shady Side, Ohio, so it's taken from the West Virginia side. And it's going to be hard to see it from this photo where you are, but if you see it, if you go to when you go to the exhibition, you'll see. And this just reinforces what the point Hollie made earlier about deforestation. When you look at the hills in the back, they're almost completely denuded of trees. And this was taken, I think, in 1922. So this was about when they started to rethink forest policy, and we're starting to build it back up.
We didn't want it all to be dark. Like there has been a process of learning and cleaning. When you know better, you do better.
So now you'll understand why there's a 1970s avocado green waffle maker in the exhibition.
It matched our refrigerator.
So moving from conflict, we go into the tradition gallery. And Ohio has a lot of wonderful traditions. A tradition of education, a tradition of faith, traditions of travel and tourism, but also, of course, a tradition of music, particularly rock and roll music. I mean, we have the Rock Hall of Fame, right? One of those great contributors to that tradition is this band Devo, which some of you may know, some of you may not. Their most iconic song was Whip It. Yeah. So we borrowed the suit from the Ohio History Connection. They also have one of the hats, but it was unfortunately already on display elsewhere, and that we couldn't get them both. So, yeah. But yeah. So, and this was one of their biggest albums, and there you can see them wearing those. So they were a new wave band. They were all art students at Kent State in the late '60s and early '70s, and so it was a really heady time to be at a place like Kent State, and they were.
This is one of those ones where we learned also. I mean, this is music we grew up hearing on the radio, but we did not. We didn't.
At that time, there, as a lot of young people at that time, they were becoming rather disillusioned with where things were going. In fact, that's where the name comes from. They were talking about devolution. We were not evolving as a society; we were devolving as a society. So hence Devo. And so there were 5 guys in the original band, although the band members changed a little bit early on. But they were friends and they were making some music together. But really, it is largely believed that it was May 4th at Kent State where they all kind of sat up and took notice and thought, okay, we need to do something. And what they decided to do was make music. Which brings us to another object.
Which has a wonderful local collection.
Yes, you all know Bill Reynolds, right? He was Kent State class of 7. He was an art student. So he would have known, I'm sure he knew some of the guys in Devo and Chrissy Hine from the Pretenders. Well, he and his girlfriend at the time were art students and they needed a place to store their art supplies. So they went
to leave your stuff out, and Bill has said that your things got stolen if you just left them out. So they bought this old.
This is his little beanie that he wore. Back in those days, they made freshmen wear beanies. So they went to a local antique shop and bought this 18th century European blanket chest just to store their art supplies.
So they could block.
But so Bill was a senior in 1970. He wasn't on campus on May 4th. He was elsewhere. But that was at the point, deferments were done. And so he graduated in May, and within a few months, he was a medic in the jungles in Vietnam. He served there for a year. Not a pleasant time, as you can imagine. And when he came home, he experienced what a lot of veterans did when they came home. His story is actually one of a bunch of stories that Bob Green compiled in this book, and I'm just going to read just a short segment of it. Having served in Vietnam in 1970 and 71, we were warned that our reception stateside might be less than desirable. Many of us returning home came right from the field and were in somewhat poor condition to meet the public. What hurt me most was coming home on the flight. I hadn't had time to change clothes and had to transfer to a civilian flight in Hawaii, and no one would sit next to me until an Army nurse stationed in Hawaii and heading home came along. It was the best conversation I'd had in a year.
It's a wonderful book. It's just a collection of reminiscences. It really is an attempt to just make oral history. Some of them are longer, some of them. That really, I think, is the entirety of Bill's.
It's just a little bit more, but not much.
But it's a very interesting book just to read for different perspectives.
So, Bill came home. He ended up backpacking around Ireland for a while after that. And then, of course, he decided he wanted to get into history. He started up at Hale Farm and Village, and then before long, a shot opened up to come down to Marietta, and he was here. Well, he's still here, of course, but he worked for the Ohio History Connection for 50 years, most of which time was here. And he's done a lot of good. He also helped found an organization called Vietnam Veterans Against War. So he and his brethren have been at Kent State on May 4th, just about every anniversary since then. And also a fun little known fact about Bill. He is one of only 2 people on the planet who was present as a reenactor for the Gettysburg 100th anniversary and 150th anniversary.
They're just 2.
Oh.
So, it's an interesting thing talking about Devo, the devolution. It's kind of a very idealistic view of it. This, am I talking about okay? Or?
We've done ugly things as a society before. I mean, we just talked about Henry Boyd and what he had to endure. The picture on the left is, it is actually one of 2 images in a book published in the mid-1760s on Colonel Bouquet's travel through the Ohio Valley.
The thing that makes it cool as an art image is that it's the first image that we know of by somebody.
First published image of what is now Ohio by somebody who was actually here. So not some fantastical image created by some map maker in London.
Based on someone's description.
And it's Colonel Bouquet. You can give the brief synopsis.
So this was a fascinating thing. Again, part of the reason that we do these is that we just like learning things. And then we get to act like we knew it all along, but we didn't. So Colonel Bouquet was fascinating. So after picking your brain back in your middle school history, after the French and Indian War, the French and the British were coming to peace terms, but Pontiac and other natives in the area were saying, we don't have to make peace. They can make peace if they want to, but we're amassed. We can continue to go ahead and push these people. Our goal stays the same. We can continue to push people out of our territory. And they began making a push eastward. They got as far as Pittsburgh. And Bouquet was in Philadelphia at the time. He got 500 men and he started coming west. And they began to push them back. They pushed back all the way to kind of the headwaters of the Muskingum in near Coshocton. And they were within striking distance by that point in the fall of a number of villages. And Bouquet said, we're going to make peace, or we're going to burn every village within striking distance. And so one of the Bouquet's terms of peace was, you have to return all captives. And this is a really interesting image because the child is sort of trepidatious. These are children. So on the one hand, it's a very complicated story. They were absolutely kidnapped from their family, many of whom were killed. But on the other hand, these were children who had been raised by these people who no longer spoke English. And it was a very traumatic thing. Some of them snuck away on the trip back and ran back. One of the things that I was fascinated. So how many people have heard the story about intentionally transmitting smallpox to the Indians? Did you think that story was true, or did it sound like that sounded like it was maybe made up? I'd always heard that, but I didn't know how much we knew. It was Bouquet on this same trip. They were at the fort in Pittsburgh, and he was corresponding with his commander, Jeffrey Amherst, back in Philadelphia, and he said, let's make peace with the Indians. Tell the tribes in the area that if they'll come down to the fort, we'll give them a gift. And so, like a plug of tobacco or a small pot or whatever, and 2 blankets. Take the blankets from the smallpox hospital. And we know that they did it because they actually asked for reimbursement. basically they had to write a requisition slip saying, I needed to purchase more blankets and we need to be reimbursed for them because we gave our blankets to the Indians from the smallpox hospital. So that actually did happen, and it was on this same drive west to the Muskingum. So again, the idea that we are devolving as a society. I have teenagers in my house at the moment, and that's a very idealistic view that like humans are somehow so much worse or so much better than we've ever been. We have historically been.
History's messy. We've always been good and bad, and we just hope to learn from both and do a little bit better next time. So that's Devo. And we're going to move into the last gallery, which includes my favorite story. Of all 250 stories, this is my favorite. So you see that little... So, okay, imagine it's 1962. You're John...
Sicily.
You're
1921.
You're John Glenn. You're spinning around the planet at 17,000 miles an hour in Friendship 7. And, tiny, those capsules were cramped. And he reaches over, opens up a little bag.
The one personal bag you're allowed to take with you.
And the little felt mouse right there just floats up. And he almost surely chuckled to himself because that was put there as a practical joke by Alan Shepard. They all had this ongoing conversation. There was a comedian back in those days who did this astronaut bit who always felt bad about the little mice that they always, mice and monkeys and dogs and cats that they would do with all the experiments that they always got sent up and they never came back. And John Glenn apparently lamented that he never, all these little mice went to space and never came back. So Alan Shepard gave him a mouse that he could take up to space and bring home safely. Isn't that a great story?
So that's the kind of thing we also really tried to do with the exhibit. Yes, we could get John Glenn's spacesuit or whatever, but we wanted these little bits that tell the story, but from an angle that you maybe would not have heard.
That's the micro story about that one little incident. It's space. So what is that? That's the bigger incident. The bigger story there is transportation. No state in the Union has contributed more to the history of transportation, I think, than Ohio. Obviously the Wright brothers here. That's a pretty important story. And this is the amazing fact of the day. December 1903 is when they had their first powered flight. There's the first powered flight, December 1903. 65 or 66 and a half years later, we put somebody on the moon. Also an Ohioan, by the way. That's an incredibly short. A lot of you in this room are younger than that or older than that, right? So that's a really short amount of time to go from literally the first time. That's like a toddler taking his first steps and like the next day running a marathon. That's such an incredible pace of technological advancement that was happening largely due to Ohioans. And the history of transportation has been enormous in the state. Obviously, as we talked about, the first transportation, even before white folks crossed the mountains, would have been canoes. It's just floating on the water, maybe a little bit of paddling. And then then Americans come across the water, and again, it's mostly just floating. It's when there's no power there. Then we add. Oh, you should know this. This is a view of a local scene. It's highly romanticized. That's actually the point. That's Fort Harmar. We know was in stone, but the artist took some liberties. But the sailing ships.
That's why it was important when we mentioned the other view by someone who'd actually been here.
And this was done by a British sea captain in the early 19th century. It's labeled Marietta 1792. You all know about the shipbuilding industry here? Yeah. So again, that's something that nobody outside of Marietta realizes. We were building 400-ton ships.
Massive ships.
That were sailing down. Do you know why they stopped building them?
That's what we thought too.
That slowed them down. Although the falls of the Ohio at Louisville was a bigger challenge. 1860. Now again, steamboats and railroads absolutely dented that business good bit. It was 1860. The suspension bridge, the Roebling suspension bridge, was built at Cincinnati.
Stern wheelers have those big hinged steam stacks.
You can't hinge masts. So that was the end of shipbuilding and ship sailing on the Ohio. But we go from still floating and wind powered. Then we get, there's a canal boat. It's not on the big rivers, but the Ohio and Erie, the Miami Erie Canal, still floating things, but still transportation is getting more and more efficient. Then we get to steam power, where again, thousands and thousands and thousands of boats up and down the river carrying goods and people. I don't know if you have any. This is John Stobart. Are you familiar with him as an artist? He was a British-born artist, moved to Canada. Most of his paintings are of the golden age of sail on the East Coast, like Boston Harbor, Newport Harbor from the Revolutionary era through the mid 20th century or mid 19th century. This is the one he did of Marietta. Stobart, Stobart. So now we're into powered transportation. Steamboats, again, hugely important, not just economically, but also culturally. This is a coverlet made in Wayne County, so in the Worcester area. That guy would have never seen a steamboat because they didn't have them on any of the small rivers up there, but nevertheless, he integrated them into his coverlets. And then we get to, of course, more powered transportation, and that's railroads. This is a fun little drawing of the Huron River. And that bridge is one of the rotating ones like we have here. You see a masted ship coming off the lake. You can't see it. There's a tugboat pulling it into wherever it's docking. And again, trains, if you look at a mid-19th century map of Ohio, it looks like a spider web with all the rail lines. It took what the rivers are doing and multiplied by a factor of 100. And trains also became integral into American visual culture. This coverlet that has the train in the border. Then we're moving our powered transportation from the ground to the air. Also to the air in another way. This is the USS Akron, the rigid airship built by the Goodyear Airship Company, which was a sister company to the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. The frame, actually, this is a photograph by Margaret Bork White, and the frame is duralumin, which is actually the material that they use to make the infrastructure of the rigid airships. Ohio has a pretty impressive car history. I mean, we're not Detroit, but Honda started making cars here in the 70s. So we've been contributing to powered road transportation. And then, of course, space. So literally from floating in canoes or paddling in canoes to space travel, it all happened here. And so that's why we have a little mouse.
All of that leads us to now. And I really just the thing that drives it home for me, it's so much more interesting to know this aspect of history because I remember being in elementary school and hating the American Revolution because how many tax acts do you want me to memorize? And who took Fort Pitt this week and then renamed it Fort Duquesne? Like, what is happening? But all this transferring back and forth, it was water. That was what it all was. When you're thinking, why were we fighting over in Western Ohio, which was largely swamp? Because the Maumee River, which is only 130 miles wide, has a 7-mile portage to the Wabash, which puts you in the Mississippi. And you could come, if you controlled that area, that 7-mile stretch, and you could transmit goods securely, the world was your oyster. And so all of that fighting doesn't make any sense until you understand what people were fighting about. And it was fighting for that control and fighting for the heartland of America.
And so that's our brief introduction to Heartland. You've seen about 15, 18 objects of the 250. There's a lot more to see. So definitely plan on making the trip there. It's through April 26th. Or plan on one of the 2 Sunday programs so you can double dip and hear the program, but also visit the museum.
And go to Provisions for lunch.
Yeah, Provisions just down the street. And we are happy to take any questions.
Or just chat, because it's so nice to see faces here that I don't get to see here. The Roebling Suspension Bridge.
Yeah. So yes. Yep. Yeah. It takes you just from Cincinnati across the river to Covington. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. You can walk or drive. That was John Roebling's practice bridge. The next bridge he built after that was the Brooklyn Bridge.
I'm sorry, the next bridge his wife built after that when he had a mental breakdown.
He started and his wife finished it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Steve. They are in the People Gallery.
You should have changed your slides.
Yeah, I should have. So McKinney and Hall, Thomas McKinney and James Hall were artists in the 1820s, 30s, 40s, and they were a number of artists who right around the time of the Removal Act, and that's when natives were banished to their reservations in the Indian Territory, who were concerned. They wanted to go and record these people before they disappeared, because that's they saw the wind blowing that way, and so they hired a number of artists, including Charles Bird King, to paint portraits. A lot of them were done when delegations were sent to treat with the U.S. government in Washington, and so they had all these portraits painted, and then they produced a really wonderful multi-volume big folio set called The History of the Indian Tribes of North America, with 120 lithographs. Now, the original paintings are almost all gone. They burned in the Smithsonian fire in the 1860s. But those lithographs, and we have 5 of them that Steve was kind enough to create really wonderful frames for, that depict of the 125 subjects. These are the 5 that had Ohio connections. They were all Shawnee. They're in the exhibition in the People Gallery.
They're actually, it's an interesting thing because there were delegations. So let's see, there are 5. One of them was Tenskwatawa. I can never say that. Who was he was Tecumseh's brother, the prophet. And there was Black Apple, Black Hoof.
Black Hoof. I forget the guy from over near Xenia. Captain.
They called him Captain John. Wasn't Captain John?
No, it wasn't Captain Pipe.
There were 5, and I actually dug into the various histories, and it was really interesting. But a couple of them were just traveled, but were respected leaders, not chiefs, but who had probably had been part of the delegation had gone east. Oh, thank you.
Poster, it said public sale. I'm just curious, what was up for sale on that little poster?
It was an auction broadside. As an auctioneer, I love those. If you've been to our gallery, you see there's a whole bunch in the entryway. That was kind of a nod to the fact that a big reason that exhibition existed is because of collectors, people who go to auctions. Like I said, there were more than 30 lenders. Only a handful were museums. Most were collectors.
But what's that public
That,
sale?
that was an estate auction up in Summit County.
Yeah.
I think it was in 1830 something, so it was an early one. And it listed, the usual, livestock and farming equipment, but also.
Is that the one that says goods too tedious to mention?
No, that was another one.
There are a lot of them. They run together.
Yeah.
Other goods too tedious to mention. Just come look. That's what we should title the talk. Other things too tedious to mention.
Yeah.
We go to Columbus yesterday, and we went early specifically to see this display. I was just blown away, and I mean, it was just amazing. I walked out of there agog. And in retrospect, I would like to have heard this presentation before going.
They go
But
back.
it's free.
So you got a lot more out of it today than yesterday. I mean, I read stuff, but he was not.
And I certainly appreciate the compliment. We can't take all of that. I mean, as curators, our job is to kind of form the story and select the objects, and then we hand everything over to the team at DECO, particularly Bill Mann, the exhibition designer, and his team who did the installation.
It's not hard to come up with a list of interesting things, 250 interesting things. It's really hard to put them into 4.5 rooms and make them not look like a yard sale.
You have to look up and look down, because in some cases they're almost all the way up to the ceiling, because it was just so much stuff. And Bill did a great job of putting them in those galleries. It's immersive. We joked about it being an immersive experience early in our planning, but it really is, and that's because of how wonderfully he did the work.
Just sitting out there. I mean, it's not enclosed or anything, and it's just like, oh my God.
That's one of those challenges when you're designing an exhibition is, sometimes things need to be undercover, but if you put it undercover, then it's now a little bit further removed. And so Bill did a great job of securing things, sometimes undercover, sometimes not. And of course, they always have docents. So security is, well, they're always watching and listening. Yeah.
They are.
Yeah.
I mixed that one up.
Yeah, Barbara's mentioned it's a Nathaniel Clark pot. It's one of the best ones that survives. It's normally at the castle, but they were kind enough to let us borrow it.
How long would it take to see everything really well? All day or?
solid couple of hours anyway. I mean, so the other thing we've done is
When you have that many objects, it's very difficult to put label copy on the wall without making it it visually distracts and becomes overwhelming. So we made up binders for each gallery space.
there should also be QR codes on the wall. You can shoot that. It'll take you to a website with all the stories. So, and there's a lot there. So if you're a reader, you could spend a lot more than 2 hours.
Yeah, that would actually, depending on how you like to experience things, finding the website and looking through those things beforehand would maybe be an option.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Say your place was in Lancaster.
The Decorative Arts Center is right on East Main Street in Lancaster, 145 East Main. It's got a big sign out front, but currently it's got a retaining wall, and about 30 feet of the wall is covered up with an exhibition sign, so it's hard to miss. There's parking around back.
It's right downtown. And I do diligence. Aaron left flyers here if anybody wants the extra dates. And we're in Whipple, so come see us. Auction.
It'll be mid-April.
Come have a donut, slice of pizza. Listen to me harangue Andrew.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, thank you. I mean, our goal wasn't necessarily to inspire pride; it's to get people to think. But there are plenty of ugly stories, but we try to include some inspirational and good stories as well, so that we can be honest about who we are and who we have been. But at the same time, there is a lot to be proud of.
You did too, the
Thank
video
you.
between the rooms, or 2 rooms, I don't know, transportation and that kind of whatever.
Yeah, and then the little stairwell. But
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah.
Again, that they have wonderful talent. There's a guy who, you just feel like a mess when you're doing. I don't know if anybody's ever done that kind of work where somebody films you and then turns it into a video. I have not watched it. I cannot watch myself.
There's also
but Andrew tells me that it's very good.
there.
But they take an hour and a half of what just feels like I don't know what I've said. I have no idea, and they stitch it together, and you just look beautiful and coherent.
And then some other video content up on Daco's YouTube channel.
Yes.
Also, 10 TV. We spent an afternoon with one of their videographers,
Oh, yes, and they did a nice
yeah, Brand put together a great 11-minute bit on the exhibition that it was posted to 10 TV's Facebook the other day, so you can find that out there as well.
Thanks. I just talk about it and gradually brilliant things come out. Scattered in the midst. That's Andrew's job, is to just sort through. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I really did feel the truth of it when I said it. But it's just, from when we started trying to figure out how we would do this, we have meetings in the car. I drive and he works in the passenger seat, and he also has to answer all my questions. And I have a lot of questions. But he was just sitting there with a notepad and jotting down, food, state fair, environmental disasters. And we're just writing all these topics down and then trying to think of what would represent those stories. And it really is. It's, immigration struggles, industry and innovation. And I mean, from human interest to the entire struggle of American history, the revolution, it all, we got a little bit of all of it.
This exhibit. We went to see Equal in Goodness, and I believe the two of you curated that show as well.
Yeah, that was
And
my first show. That was 15 years ago.
Wow.
And Equal in Goodness was, I mean, it was just mind blowing how well that was put together. And based on that, I knew this was not going to be a disappointment either. This was going to be exciting. So really looking forward to it.
Yes, Equal in Goodness there's a printed catalog.
It's in the gift shop there. That was.
Erin will be so proud. You have to tell her that we worked around to getting people to.
Well, I don't know that they have it here. They should.
Oh, it's in the gift shop at Lancaster.
Yeah. So this is my 5th exhibition at DECO. This is our 3rd working together. My first 2, Equal in Goodness, was Ohio Decorative Arts 1788 to 1860, and then the follow-up was A Tradition of Progress, Ohio Decorative Arts 1860 to 1945. Then we did Childhood, was it an Ohio childhood, 200 years of growing up, and then hindsight,
The art of
the art of looking back.
kind of memory painting in people's different views of Ohio, and then this one. And I have ideas for the next one.